from the Arts and Poetry Center. Welcome to Jack Ludwig and Ama Ata Edu.
I like telling this story about 20 years ago or so. I had the opportunity in running an institute to choose writers from all over the world to come and participate. And there was somebody called Ama Ata Edu from Ghana. Looked very, very promising, a young writer, and lo and behold, she appeared and was a great star at the Harvard International Seminar, and I have kept in touch with Ama since then through her various vicissitudes and triumphs. Much of the stuff, Mike, where leave?
We took them over into the other room.
Okay. Her publications are available. Dilemma of a Goat. They'll still be able to see them all, right? Sister Killjoy, the whole bit. You'll see them across the way. She is an important poet, an important dramatist, an important novelist, and more than that, an important person. She's an important person in my life, and she's going to be an important person in your life, starting right now. Ama Ata Edu.
Thanks a lot, Jack, Professor Lund. Please, can you hear me from the, does my voice carry to the back? Yeah. Okay. First, I would like to express my gratitude to you all for being here this evening. On an evening in November 1988, one should imagine that anybody would, have other things to do with their time. So I'm really grateful that you've turned out to come and listen to my poetry. As you probably, most of you here, I'm now learning are writers. And writers survive, on the appreciation of other people. We need that kind of security. So thanks a lot for turning up. I've read my poetry. I've been reading and talking, lecturing around a bit. So in order to sort of answer a question that, is there going to be a discussion?
Sure,
yeah.
Sure, yeah.
I hope you won't mind if I just say to those maybe one or two people who may not know the reason why I speak English or I write in English, that my country, I'm a Ghanaian, and Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast, which was a British colony, and English is the official language. I'm saying this right away because invariably, wherever I have read, people have said, how come you are an African and you write in English? But still, people should feel free to raise the language issue because it is really quite controversial, even in Africa. The issue of African writers, writing in modern European languages like English, French, Spanish, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to say that. Now about me and poetry. Being here at Stony Brook is quite a bit of a pilgrimage for me. Jack has said how we met in the 1960s. But apart from everything else he's done and other people have done to make me feel quite welcome here, and I would like to express my gratitude for that. There's a special thing about me and Stony Brook in the sense that a Ghanaian student who was here, offered a PhD dissertation on my work to Stony Brook University. And I think I cannot pass out this opportunity of expressing appreciation for a certain type of immortalization. I mean, it's Shakespeare. I mean, people are normally dead or they are lame or something. So I just wanted to say something about that. I hope I brought my stuff to read to you. Again, going back to the issue of language, one thing that I would like to say about me and poetry is that I had always been aware from when I was a little girl that I wanted to write poetry. But then I realized that writing poetry in Africa is like a willful refusal to communicate with your environment, because a high percentage of African peoples don't operate in English or even French or whatever. And it's already a problem when you write when the writing is in is prose, like the novel or short story. When it's poetry, it's tougher because poetry uses so few words to communicate. Anyway, what I would like to say is that my collection of poetry really is made up of stuff that insisted on themselves on getting written in spite of my own reluctance. In 1985, a collection of my poetry was published in Zimbabwe, in Harare, Zimbabwe. And I remember when it came out, a press person interviewing my daughter and saying, how do you feel about your mother's book? And she's poetry book, and she said, oh, I'm so relieved it's out. And the person said, why are you so relieved? And she said, for years, they've been bits and pieces floating, among our luggage as we traveled around the world. I'd like to read, the first poem I'd like to read is called Greetings from London. And it was written after my first visit to the United States, Harvard, and I was going home, supposed to be going home to Ghana, and I stopped in England, ended up by staying nearly a year. But one day I was in London and I had wanted to take the underground, the tube, the train. Just before I went underground, I saw an evening paper which was screaming some headlines about the British government, which was a Labour government then, I think, deciding to send weapons to South Africa. I had been here too, so I sat in the train reading this and trying to figure something out. And it occurred to me then that the situation in South Africa was, at the time, I thought I was making a discovery, that the situation in South Africa was complicated by the collective interest of the Western world in that situation. This is Greetings from London. Sissy, do you remember when grandfather severed a leg in 1867, climbing palm trees so the machines in Manchester would not die for lack of oil? That was before Sitting Bull had to stand for the shaft to sink into Cherokee country. And now they say in order that Mrs. Smith can do the season's baking, some arms should go to Cape Town after all. But you and I are too precious to die. Meanwhile, I hold a sherry in my hand, eating shit for a shilling which is not there. But wake me early, Sissy, when the drums roll. And if before then a splinter meant for another should pierce my heart, gather up my brain for a Christmas pudding to Texas. And people have always said, oh, Alma, you are such a political writer. Well, I mean, really, political writer. I think everyone knows that everything we do is really quite political. But for me, it gets to some very funny proportions. So that even when I try to write about falling in love, this is what happens, to the poem about me being in love, or thinking I'm in love, or something. The title is Of Love and Commitment, and I shall read bits, from it, because it's a long poem. Of love and commitment. How did I know? I knew because all of a sudden, I started doing things I had never done before. Things I never knew I could do. Things I always knew I should never do. For instance, like stopping longer than was necessary to talk with his friend after we had said the initial hellos and how have you been. And when he said, this and that is at home and we just live around the corner, changing my mind about the hot comb and the hair grease. Oh, it says clearly on the bottle, water repellent. And what his name had a little lamb whose hair was black as pitch. Of course, it stands to reason that he should have been larger than life, Dido of the latter days, my Aeneas. And he, with his great limbs stretched out, the hair of his beard curled in sleep, just wondered if I could not go natural while I sat and loved. The house was in a quiet neighborhood with fear or contentment. The room was unlived in, the tap had not run for months, the saucepans uncooked in, the guitar unplayed. And I, who had never been able to look after myself, knew I could look after you. Oh my dear, how shall I thank you for fathering the mother in me? We prompted one another on the saints and the martyrs, counting in coma. I borrowed his Malcolm's autobiography to read. Perhaps we mourned the death of a hope. Perhaps we rejoiced at the birth of a promise. Stokely? Ah, yes, Stokely. He said to the cop, I hope you let her in. I have wanted to assure him since that the pig did let me in. Who was he not to? Yes, a new world was being born with a new day when we shoved the last item into the car. But the packing took a long time, or the talking did. The night was long and very short. It was so long, we wrote a poem, a short story, 3 long plays, a novel, finished our formal studies, saw the kids through school, solved other personal problems, frustrated neo-colonial scholarship, and made the revolution. There was not time enough to see what was in one another's eyes. I hear the thunder, I see the lightning. I hear the thunder, I see the lightning. Is my love's window open? Is my love's door ajar? Perhaps the rain gets into his room. Perhaps the wind blows out his clothes. Leave the rest of my hair unplaited, sister. Leave the threads hanging loose. I must hurry to my love's room. I must hurry to shut his window. I must hurry to my true love's room. Before the rain gets in, sister. Before the rain gets in. And then Professor Eldridge drones of the University of Fura Bay used to come to Cape Coast University to do what we call in the British system external examining. And he did this with us for about 4 years. And every time he came and saw me, he said, "How's my little girl with Africa and women on her mind?" So when I had broken my leg and was lying in hospital, I did this book is in this collection is in 3 sections, and one section I did within a week for someone who writes like 1 poem a year. It was quite an outpouring for me. I did the section that is actually someone talking to sometime, which is the title of the collection, in hospital. And what occurred to me when I was lying there, well, later on, was that so much of these poems, 1 or 2 at least, I would dedicate to Eldred, and I did because when I was laid up at Cape Coast University Hospital, I realized that it didn't matter what women suffered from, whether they were terminal cancer patients or they had come to get their womb scraped, or like me, they were orthopedic cases. We were all packed into what they call Gyne 1, the female ward. I mean, Gyne 1. If you were looking for a woman patient, it didn't matter what she suffered from, just come to Gyne 1. On the other hand, there were about 4 different sections to the hospital for male patients. I mean, male chest something, male throat, male, And of course, you couldn't help, I was outraged by this. What is it? Does it mean we are not sick with real diseases? And what happened was that most nights I would lie, I never sleep much, but in the hospital, I hardly slept at all. And so I could hear the women, groaning, people dying, and so on and so forth. And what also occurred to me was how much women bleed, really. I mean, like, with all sorts of things. So this, what I'm going to read now is from the section, someone talking to sometime, and it's called, I should know where, Gyne 1. And the beginning is a Ghanaian nursery rhyme for hide and seek, for children when they're hiding, What I didn't realize until later on, much later on, was how sexually violent this nursery rhyme, is. And when I wanted to write about Gyne 1, it occurred to me that, I would want to introduce the poem with this nursery rhyme. So this one is infantil, it's only a few lines. The introduction. Gyne 1. Kwa joye, kwa joye, ale tempua yenyimti, ale tempua yenyimti. Trolley out, trolley in. Trolley out, trolley in. Getting scraped, lying in. Investigating only postpartum complications. Tying it up, throwing one out, removing it all. Dying for it, dying with it, dying from it. Or just dying. Only corner of the only world where water must surely be thicker than blood. All agony, no ecstasy. For he comes and stands with a sheepish grin that tries to hide the scowl and fails. often he doesn't come at all, can't be bothered. Or he's run to Lagos in panic and naked dread. There she lies, the lamb, rounded limbs, dimpled cheeks, dewy lips, parted in farewell to a barely understood life. And they said they didn't know much about anything, except that there is a God, and he is a man. And whenever I felt that something I wanted to communicate was too tough even for me to just unravel it for myself, I've tried to do it over the last 18 years with my daughter. I mean, like, I write a poem, you know, and trying to speak to her. And so now there are about 4 Kina poems. And the second for, you know, my daughter is called Kina. The second for Kina poem is trying to figure out this whole business of how Africa comes to be the richest, the richest continent potentially on this earth. I mean, like, you know it, the diamonds, the beers, gold, uranium, platinum, everything. I mean, if there is a resource, natural mineral, it is, you know, in Africa. And you know the kind of images we've got of Africa, at least in 1988. You know Bob Geldof and this whole business about hunger and Band-Aid for Africa and stuff. It has never really made sense to some of us. How is it that we are so rich? This poem, as I said, is for my daughter. And it asks questions in relation to, for instance, a country like Kenya, which is her father's country, exporting potatoes to England. I mean, I'm coming from Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe exports beef to the European Economic Community. Anyway, it blows your mind, to use an American expression. So this is for Kina 2. And it's supposed to have, but he said, the he is supposed to be her father who died some years ago. He was Kenyan. But he said, princess, and remember, royalty are made, not born. It is not for lack of what you could have had. Step up this way and see these valleys of green grass that the winds, the rain, and forever sun have rooted so firmly, fanned up and leveled down as though it was a UN proto-farm. All that can, should, must be yours. If I could drive the malaria from my bones, accept what I cannot accept, then lift up my gun and shoot. Here on either side of the great precipice, time has not begun to be restless yet. The winds are so still, I asked a toucan for a drink, and he heard me. Ah, the land is truly beautiful. The cattle are healthy, their udders are full, and they might even smile at milking, especially now that their milk and their meat go to faraway places to feed mouths that are less hungry than our own. As happens to the potatoes, we till so slowly, so painfully, using ancient implements, hoeing and brushing. Baby, it couldn't have been you that I feared, the noises, the praises, the blame, an affection running as thin as flax in the hands of a crippled day. And my love, poured by rising expectations and rocketing inflations, just couldn't fare better than a fat mouse before a lean cat. They say they mean us all to walk, swim, and fly. What do we do but crawl into corners and die, who were born without legs, fins, or wings? No, there are choices I couldn't face, even for you, my little queen. This is my 4th visit to the United States, and on my 2nd visit, I had been invited here to be something they called a consultant professor on ethnic studies. And what that translated to in reality was a lecture tour of small southern black colleges. This was 74, 75. And I was based on Dillard campus, Dillard University in New Orleans. And that gave, out of that experience, a few poems came out, which forms the 2nd part of this, part 2 of this collection. And the entire section, the title for that is New Orleans, mid-1970s. Some tropics are cold. I never talk of my New Orleanian experiences except when I'm reading, because I discovered that there's a lot of romanticism about New Orleans and Mardi Gras. It didn't strike me like that, and it might be obvious through some of these poems. Anyway, one of the poems is actually titled Mardi Gras. A friend insisted that Mardi Gras was coming and that I should go to see Mardi Gras. I went to see Mardi Gras, and I returned home in such a rage. I thought I'd go crazy if I didn't do something. This is what, eventually, I think writers do that. We write half of the time so we don't go crazier than we already are. This is Mardi Gras. Here in the South, where trees used to grow such strange and sudden fruits, people have learned not to see the Africa that is everywhere in things, in their own words, in their own deeds. So be it then. If gumbo is French or Spanish or both, what does it matter anyway? Africa has been hurting for far too long, too deeply, for any of us to really mind that black men in New Orleans play Zulus in blackface. Some of us stood on the sidewalks, wondering what name to give to anything, since in this land of sharp descriptions and determined name-calling, no one seems to have a name for either the kinky-haired, thick-lipped honkies or the straight-nosed, blue-eyed spooks. And then towards Thanksgiving. This is, okay. We are near Thanksgiving. Some friends asked me to spend the day with them. But just before, a day or two before Thanksgiving itself, I was so ill. I really didn't feel like leaving my room and being with people, because I thought I would, I'd be a sport. Thanksgiving is a festive occasion. But then they insisted, and they said, at least you can lie down you know, which in the end is what I did. They put me in a bedroom where I was lying, and then I was listening, you know, to the noises from the kitchen, and it was very warm and welcoming. Now, this family that invited me is like a second generation, I mean, they are like a second generation immigrants from the Caribbean. You know, they are black people from the Caribbean. And I was lying there in pain and still feeling, oh, Africa to the Caribbean and to New Orleans. It started me thinking, and it occurred to me that really nothing, you know, like I was also thinking back to Africa and saying, we are the same, you know, nothing seems to have changed. These people are just behaving like a bunch of African women carrying on in the kitchen, hollering and so on. I mean, in the end, much later than that day, I did a poem which I titled Acknowledgement. I mean, we are the same, I mean, both in terms of the positive and the negative. Therefore, what new questions shall we ask? Seeing the answers are already so old, so known, and they clamor for attention like ancient black women, used by all, ignored by all, buried in unmarked places. And the fate is only a little worse for whores than ladies, decent and respectable, dowried and wedded, with children that do well the Lord. What does it matter that we cross real woods and wild waters of wool, jungles of asphalt, other synthetic kingdoms, factories of death, for death, to death? We still come to villages on waterfronts, oil-clogged, banks of rivers that breed dangerous gifts, houses of cardboard and rejected aluminum sheets, the passage of normal days. And our hearts huddle together for comfort or stand alone on islands formed from the night's downpour. We shrivel here at the edge of the Sahara with heat, dry dust that buries. We shrivel there in the heart of Louisiana with whimsical waters, wormy and wet. You can only go mad, catch fever, die. No one is talking of yesterday yet. You weep angry, you weep confused that something of value should still be here. Kindness and generosity trying so very hard to dance through needy hands which were too soft to learn the strict art of meat carving. I think of a festive meal with gratitude, not just for the grub, which I was too ill to eat, but for an invitation from lonelier wanderers, a bed to lay a tired head on, while from the big room, your forever kitchen, voices murmur, full with legends of islands in the sun and tales of other cities. The voices murmur on, deep as the Africa, that is their fate, relentless. Do I have more? And then in New Orleans, I thought, oh, well, let's see if I could do a better job about writing a poem on being in love all over again. And this is what came out in New Orleans. By me in love. Robert, the title of the poem, actually it's two poems in one, and the titles are For a Zulu in the Bayou and Loris in Woody. Robert, now they say oil is more precious than blood. I believe them. Since we have acquired steel heads, iron hearts, and plastic veins, yet such a spirit as wills humans to glorious softer dreams, seals from even this lonely wilderness of that alien labor camp, your exile, and across the foggy, murderous marshes of this corner of the world too, where our people have labored, suffered so long and so uselessly. Therefore, as I return to Africa, our black mother, I urge to carry this bitterness in my mind, in my soul. I blame her, her carelessness, her generosity for all our woes then and now. Not that it helps any. My dear, there are some meetings must happen, however brief, inevitable encounters born out of seemingly senseless time. I met you, and that's reason enough, even though time has played her number on you and me. My dear, since black is truly beautiful, and we are black, beauty overflows from you to me in other forms, a quiet voice, a heart that beats to fine human things. I wander along the lines of unknown puzzling circles, touching lives that I must touch, and looking for bushy heads and hairy faces with hints of gray that is set to light as blackness lends to all colors, including gray. I shall miss you, miss you, miss you. And now I think I'm going to read from one or two poems that I have done, published, but not collected. I mean, that I have done since the collection brought out. And if I can find, looking through this file is really quite something. So please bear with me if I seem to just shuffle my way along. But the first one is called Thank God, Whom Do We Thank for Women's Conferences? And since President Reagan has been to, he's been to Moscow, no? I think it's all right if I say that this conference was in Moscow. I attended a conference in Moscow just about a year ago. And this is what I wrote a number of poems as a result of attending that conference. Like how you want to put some things down. And this is one of them. Whom do we thank for women's conferences? Here in this truly no man's land, all is fair, as understood in terms not of Penelope's false blondness, but that which is truly right and healthy, where we throw our big hairy legs and bottoms that make any Levi's cry for air. Hairy too are our faces. Some were born that way, or as signs of the pills we took in, the wombs we threw out, and plain normal aging. Yet ancient graces walk elegantly tall or charmingly petite in celebration pinks and royal indigos, as though the earth itself was newly found, the air a discovery. We were not afraid of ideas, not our own, not those of others. Along these corridors and those easy days assemblies, apologizing for our being was not on. We were nobody's wives nor mistresses. No one called us mother. And when some daughter's present did, it was with the clearest mandate that they picked the fight where we brought it. We were only ourselves, each alone, as when we were born and shall be when we died, but living and together, a true power thing that searches, researches, solving, resolving, and as always, sweetly hopeful as only women can be. I think I read us two more poems. The last but one is a poem I wrote in 1985. Well, the poem has its own introduction, so I better read the introduction to you. But it was written in memory of Benjamin Moloise, who was hanged by the South African, a young poet who was hanged in 1985 because he was supposed to have been found on the scene of some murder. There was a lot of protests, a lot of pleas to stay execution from the Pope, from the Queen, but Botha was, had to have another black man for breakfast. So Moloise was hanged. And meanwhile, earlier in 85, we had got news that Alex Laguma had died in Havana. So the Zimbabwean Writers Union decided that we should at least have an evening of readings in their memory. Now this is the introduction to the poem itself is called Loving the Black Angel. Although I had known that I might read at an evening of readings organized in memory of Alex Laguma and Ben Moloise by the Zimbabwe Writers Union, I was not going to try and write a brand new poem for the occasion. How could I? It was only a week after the hanging of Moloise, and one had been trained by the English departments that poetry can only issue, quote, from emotions recollected in tranquility by, Wetworth. Besides, I knew quite well that all we felt at this murder was rage, and there was no way I or anyone else on our side of the battle lines could claim then or ever that we felt tranquil enough about it to recollect our emotions and do a poem. And that, however, that was all to change at the dawn of 25th October, the day of the readings. It had occurred to me then that if that notion of the genesis of poetry had never really sounded right to me before, it definitely sounded all wrong then. For instance, if we had organized a week for our fallen heroes according to our own African traditions, definitely those of us who were recognized by the community as being poets would be expected, naturally, to produce poetry for the occasion, and our best at that. So in the morning, I very humbly took my pen, and the following is what I was able to do. This poem should be, it's rough, for after all, it did not emanate from emotions recollected anywhere near tranquility. I've tried, there has been, I felt tempted to do something about this poem since it was written, but it's been published And I really don't think I'm going to, or that I should, but it is a bit rough.
Mama, do you want to hold on for just a second? We have many ways of immortalizing.
Thank you. So, loving the Black Angel. For Ben Moloise, Alex Laguma, and our other fallen heroes. I always knew I loved Lucifer. Don't ask me why or how. Was he not the first rebel? A champion who would not grin, grovel, scrape, creep, or kiss the original white ass. Kinsmen and friends, help me hail my princely fighter who betrayed kings and class and gleefully smashed 1,000 glittering crowns. Loving Lucifer should be easy, for his spirit that refuses to get wet soaked in stolen milk and extorted honey. And in any case, was he not rough and hairy and pitch black? Is he not my enemy's enemy, with plenty promise to be my friend? An ally come to toughen my arm as I seize thunderbolts from the earth and the skies to smash, crush, and reduce sweetly smug slave drivers to smithereens. I just love Lucifer, daring, doing, dancing through water jets, tear gas, and other great open mouths, whose only mission is forever death. I certainly should love Lucifer, who refuses to, quote, take things as they are, to whom descent with their racist hangman's rope seems prettier than the touched-up pictures of, quote, the new African bourgeoisie. Hold up the photo for better light, my good neighbor. You know, we are already rather dark. And my dear, as you know, everything in there is the best that a black man can have under the circumstances. They cut you down, comrade, and sent your spirit out. But who says I want another angel in my already hot, heaving heaven? Don't you see, in teeming celestial camps and down among the ancestors, multitudes of relentless impy, forever fighting as our heroes must? So you, Laguma, and you, Moloise, all you beautifully young dears whose lives the real devil daily snaps. Don't sleep. As you join the ancestors, don't sleep. Stay awake. Keep alert. For the battle continues. The struggle clearly continues. And we must fight. You below, us above, until nothing stands, nothing at all stands that has to fall, so that we can rebuild our lives, our hopes, our cities of gold. Oh, I just love you, Lucifer. I had always wanted to write for young people, but I hadn't had the guts, for a long time, until I went to Zimbabwe, and the ministry, the curriculum development unit section of the Ministry of Education commissioned me to do things for children, for young people, for what they called science, for science education. And I thought it really was a tall order as far as I was concerned, because here I was already feeling quite nervous about, really having to write for young people, wondering if I could come across. And then for science education, me and science, that's odd. So again, I